Welcome to a special episode 8 breaking news edition of the Film Realist podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Naranya. This is the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That's hopefully for somebody. Could not wait till next week. There's been a bunch of news that has been brewing, and then today, day of recording, a massive bombshell was announced. Couldn't wait any longer. I had a couple mailbag questions from Jermaine that he wanted to be addressed, so I am here to address them. But before that, I should mention, if you don't want to hear specific news topics covered, then you can jump around in the time codes. That is completely acceptable, as they will be listed in the episode description. But if you would like to watch the episode live, you can on twitch.tv/filmrealists. Don't forget, realists has 2 E's. So yes, so there's been breaking news. We have 3 or 4 news topics to cover, and I'm going to get into the biggest one, which is the header image. Deadpool 3 has a release date, September 6th, 2024. That's pretty good news, except for the fact that Ryan Reynolds himself has announced on Twitter, through all the social medias, that Wolverine, aka Logan, aka Hugh Jackman, will be returning to play the character that he retired in 2017 in the film Logan. This may be one of the biggest bombshells to seemingly come out of nowhere. What's most interesting about this in general is, while it is incredibly exciting, it honestly shouldn't be overly surprising. Ryan and Hugh are very good friends, and they've been campaigning with each other using their own different marketing strategies for different products. That we are going to be getting a Deadpool 3. Yes, it is September 6th, 2024, which is crazy that it is going to be coming out almost more than 6 years after the second film, which is crazy. I don't recall a sequel ever being this delayed with something of the scale of Deadpool, of a Marvel movie, to be quite frank. So I have 3 major notes to talk about specifically with this. Like I said earlier, it shouldn't be hugely surprising, and you might be wondering, like, Kyle, this seems like it came out of nowhere. It kind of didn't, to some degree. If you've been following the news with Deadpool 3, it finally got a director, which was a big deal. It's Sean Levy, who's Canadian, woo, who has made a film with Hugh Jackman before, if you may have forgotten. It is Real Steel, which came out in 2011. It's a film I actually quite enjoy. And so he has a ongoing relationship with Hugh Jackman. They're still friends to this day. And then more recently, over the last 2 years, we had Free Guy, which is a film I very much enjoyed, and The Adam Project. So these are 2 films with Ryan Reynolds, building the rapport. And then obviously the relationship developed to the state where Ryan wanted him on board to make Deadpool 3. And this will be the first official appearance of Deadpool in the MCU. Unless that changes dramatically moving forward, I don't foresee it as something where they're going to waste a Ryan Reynolds appearance in another film, especially given the remaining slate of Phase 4. And Phase 5, there's a very long list of what's coming out with that. But I don't see that being the case, but you never know. I am very excited for this. I am a huge fan of Hugh Jackman. I think he belongs on the Mount Rushmore of superhero castings across the board. Marvel, DC, Fox, whatever. But at the same time, this is really interesting that this is happening. This will technically be the second reappearance of a Fox cast, or 20th Century Fox cast actor playing a role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Obviously, more recently, spoiler alert, I guess, if you haven't seen it, we had Charles Xavier, played by Sir Patrick Stewart, in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Now, while technically that wasn't the Earth 616 MCU universe, it is obviously playing to a version of the character we know. The film teases heavily that he is the version from more similar to the X-Men the Animated Series of the 1990s. But getting Hugh Jackman in this role, I think, makes it pretty abundantly clear we are not going to be getting a different version of this character moving forward. It would make even less sense if we were to get a new one in Secret Wars. I don't really understand what Marvel is doing with mutants in general. I have another news topic that we can talk about that more specifically, but does this mean that Deadpool 3 has multiverse ramifications? Technically, I believe this clearly throws it in the Multiverse of Madness saga. We know Phase 4 ends with Black Panther Wakanda Forever this year, and then we have Phase 5 where, so I'm just pulling up the cast. So this would put this as the last film announced anyways of Phase 5. We will have Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, Guardians 3, The Marvels, Blade, Captain America New World Order, Thunderbolts, and then Deadpool 3. So is this going to have connections to Ant-Man and the Wasp potentially and the Marvels, which we know Ant-Man specifically is going to have heavy implications into the Kang Dynasty, but because they have the exact same writer with Jeff Loveness, who's working on Kang Dynasty as well, also somebody who worked on several episodes of Rick and Morty. So that's really interesting because the Fox timeline obviously has been a complete disaster. Deadpool 1 and 2 were sort of out of their own time. Famously, in the first film, we only had 2 X-Men, one of which we sort of saw, but it clearly was a different version than the one we saw in the original X-Men trilogy and then in Days of Future Past. And then in Deadpool 2, we had the X-Men. I guess at that point, they would have been just post-apocalypse. They weren't in Deadpool. They weren't X-Men Dark Phoenix X-Men yet, which would have been in the 90s. So as excited as I am for this, I'm a little disappointed that we are going to be pulling more tethers from the 20th Century Fox X-Men. I love a lot of what the 20th Century Fox did with the X-Men. Obviously, they finally did give us a faithful adaptation of Deadpool, and it is incredible that we are going to see Hugh Jackman properly play Wolverine next to Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. Maybe we get a Cable cameo in there, and then we really get to see the three of them. That would be incredible. But this kind of, at least from my point of view, this puts the nail in the coffin of a Daniel Radcliffe or a Taron Egerton playing Wolverine. Because if they're using their Wolverine bullet with Wolverine himself, then I don't think that's happening anymore. I'm very confused as to what version of the X-Men we may finally get. Or is this Deadpool 3 going to be its own little pocket world? I'm not really sure, but I am excited to see this. I'm glad, while this would have been incredible that they play with these characters in their own universe, it would be really interesting to see if they do bother to bring Deadpool into the MCU proper. That's something I'm really curious about. We haven't technically had anything R-rated. I don't know exactly the rating of Werewolf by Night. I should check that currently, because then it will be what the maturity rating on that is. Because if that is, I know it's listed as horror. It recently was changed, so it would be. I'm not specifically sure. It may be mature, it may be not, but I'm not sure about that. So it's exciting to see that it was announced that we are going to be getting it. So specifically, if looking for clarity, Ryan Reynolds does say, "Hey, Hugh, do you want to be Wolverine again?" And he says, "Sure." So that's exciting. I'm very curious, which version of Wolverine? Are we finally going to get a Wolverine where he's wearing a costume? I'm not sure, but that's something I'm really looking forward to. And I hope that this does sort of maybe potentially play up the fact that they were both in R-rated films after each other. That would be something certainly very funny. But speaking of films that should have been R-rated, we have a Constantine sequel to the Keanu Reeves 2005 movie announced. Certainly not something I was expecting to get announced. Francis Lawrence is coming back. I do not have a really strong opinion of the Constantine film with Keanu Reeves. I think it's got some elements from the movie or from the comic books, but at the same time kind of did its own thing, which to some degree is what they were doing in this era. If you look pre to 2010, a lot of comic book films sort of took the title and the vague idea and then did whatever they wanted. Keanu Reeves is an actor I like a lot. Clearly, the John Wicks have been incredible, and he's on a second career renaissance with, I mean, The Matrix 4 was an absolute disaster, but other than that, he was in Toy Story 4, and he's currently making all sorts of other films that he's worked. I believe John Wick's getting a TV show. There's going to be a John Wick spin-off, Ballerina, with Ana de Armas. I'm really confused as to why this is happening at all. Warner Brothers, as a studio, and New Line, who may have been the company that produced this, I have no idea what they're doing. I don't think they know what they're doing. And it's more frustrating given the fact that J.J. Abrams had actually signed on to do stuff with Warner Brothers. No, it was a Village Roadshow production. And Constantine was something I was looking forward to them doing. As much as I enjoyed the Matt Ryan version of the character, I don't think we really ever got to experience the hard-edged version of this character. Ironically, it took a very long time for Deadpool, or it would have been 7 years before we got a proper Deadpool film, that we never really have gotten an R-rated version of Constantine. There have been animated adaptations. There was Constantine City of Demons and Justice League Dark, which were direct-to-video films that were more faithful adaptations of the character. And then due to rights issues, and honestly it worked out for better storytelling, the Sandman was able to dive more into Johanna Constantine, the way that they say the last name in that series, or at least that's the way Neil Gaiman says it, so that it's Constantine. So Johanna gets to be a more fleshed out character as opposed to somebody who just shows up for bits and pieces of the story. But the version that Matt Ryan played, unfortunately, had to stick to broadcast standards and practices on television. And as much as I don't endorse somebody smoking, it's kind of part of the character given the fact that he doesn't fear death and cancer and whatnot, and the emotional scarring of losing a young child to a demon. This could have been something really interesting, and while the film touches on this stuff briefly, the world is interesting, but ultimately it's a version of the character, and quite frankly, I don't actually think this movie's going to happen. I think this film will fall under the long line of, we announced it, it never happened. Now, you could argue Keanu Reeves is a hot commodity, and Warner Brothers just wants to make something with him because they want to maybe say sorry for the Matrix Resurrections. What was it called? I don't even remember. I've purged that movie from my brain. What was Matrix 4 called? Resurrections. I was right. So I don't necessarily know if this movie's, like I said, going to happen. I like Keanu Reeves a significant amount, another Canadian man, but I would rather just get a TV series as opposed to a film that likely won't be rated R, because the original Constantine was rated PG-13, PG if you're up here in Canada where I am. And what's most interesting to me is when it comes to financial success, especially over the last decade of Warner Brothers, that the film's budget was $7 to $100 million. So if you're going to double it based on marketing costs, it probably cost close to $200 million, and the worldwide box office was only 230. So at best, you banked $30 million off a lesser known character, and obviously in having Constantine in all the CW Arrowverse shows, that certainly had its audience, but the CW historically does not get the viewers of these other premium cable networks, and CW is on its way out. The Arrowverse is coming to an end, and I can understand wanting to do something with this character. The rights have been held up in all sorts of other places, but in my head anyways, the perfect Constantine has always been Colin Farrell, but scratch that. Fortunately, he's now currently playing the Penguin, and we're going to be getting that miniseries, which I'm very much looking forward to. So I will watch this, but I am going to be shocked, as I said earlier, if this actually happens. I don't expect it to. Why would it? Francis Lawrence has already been connected to a bunch of other things, more specifically the BioShock adaptation on Netflix. Netflix typically, when they announce stuff, usually that stuff gets made. So how deeply involved is he going to be with this? I know he recently made the Hunger Games sequel or prequel film, which I know they're trying to turn into another series. So is he going to do all of those? because he did the last 3 Hunger Games films. I don't know. There's so many different versions of this spin-off stuff of the Sandman universe. Obviously, we had the Lucifer show on Netflix, which I quite enjoyed, but that was playing in a entirely different universe, which we saw with Crisis on Infinite Earths on CW. Then we have the Sandman version. So if we were going to get any more Constantine stuff, I know this movie has its fans, but I would much rather get a Johanna Constantine spin-off. And I know Neil Gaiman has said in interviews that he'd be interested in expanding this universe. Netflix just needs to hurry up and greenlit season 2. I'm sorry we didn't watch it all in one weekend, but those episodes are like heavy dramas and they deserve to be absorbed to their fullest potential slowly. Not 8 hours over a weekend. This isn't Cobra Kai. While I love Cobra Kai, sometimes things need to take their time to sit and stew so you can really absorb exactly what you're getting from that. So on to the last news topic of the day. Then we're going to be getting into mailbags. So apparently, it has been established or recently said in an interview for Black Panther 2: Wakanda Forever that Namor, similarly to his origins in the comics, will be a mutant in the MCU. So if I'm mispronouncing this, I apologize. But Tenoch Huerta confirms Namor will be a mutant in the MCU, but he won't rule Atlantis. I mentioned it in the Deadpool news. I have no idea exactly what the MCU is doing with mutations as a whole. And quite frankly, I'm not enjoying it. It's unfortunate because the X-Men as a universe on their own was a world in which you could build justifiable hatred. I say that because it was a world in which there were only mutants and there were only non-mutants. Homo sapiens to Homo superiors, I believe, is what the scientific distinction is. But that was a world in which you only had those two possibilities. And in the MCU, a world where we've now established we've had superhumans since World War II, to just have these people starting to pop up who have superpowers born with them, I don't know how you're going to legitimately indoctrinate people who hate mutants when we have so much of these superheroes being idolized. There was a Broadway show about the Avengers and Hawkeye. Obviously, Ms. Marvel was teased to, or is a mutant, which is fitting more with the creator's original intentions, not having her want to be in a Inhuman, because Kevin Feige wants nothing to do with Inhumans, justifiably so, because that show was an absolute travesty. Thank you, Ike Perlmutter, for that absolute mess. Although, we did get to see Black Bolt in his proper suit. Anson Mount play him in Doctor Strange. Another Doctor Strange reference in this episode. Didn't expect that. So, that is... So, I'm very confused. I was really hoping that mutants were going to be on a parallel Earth to the Earth 616 era, where you could establish a history of them. You could have the Brotherhood of Mutants, you could have Xavier's School for Gifted Children, and have this long-standing rivalry / pun intended, I guess, brotherhood, and then the hatred coming from the regular people. But to just sort of been throwing them into the story, I'm really hoping at some point, because we have no X-Men film or mutant film announced, there are slots in Phase 5 to fill that out, that where is this all going to work where we get legitimate... I'm using a lot of these words because it's frustrating where these piecemeal pieces are supposed to be something exciting, where I think everybody who was a film fan was really excited when we learned that Disney had purchased 20th Century Fox because of what that could mean. And if we are just going to get bits and pieces leading into Secret Wars, where we finally have all these mutants pop up, I just don't... That, to me, feels like a mistake given the missteps currently we've had in Phase 4, which is frustrating. Because they deserve a film on their own, not to just be teased bit by bit. Like, they're not Infinity Stones. The mutants were the most important brand of Marvel outside of Spider-Man. There was a reason the comics wanted to belittle them and make Inhumans popular when when Disney as a whole didn't own them. So I don't know. I'm really excited to see Namor. Black Panther Wakanda Forever looks absolutely incredible. I got to see that trailer on the big screen, I think for the first time, when I went to watch The Woman King, which was on an earlier episode of the podcast. Be sure to check that one out. So just throwing Mutant around feels really cheap and unearned, quite frankly, given we have no idea why there are like two. If we're at some point, are we just going to have a movie where they pop up, or are we going to have a mass wave of humanity be mutated by like somebody like Kang? I don't know. I hope something like that happens, where then you can build in the discourse between regular people and mutant kind, but who knows? I don't really know. It's something that I wasn't expecting to see recently. I just thought they were going to be like, yeah, he's half human, he's half water people. The end of the story, but I guess nope, they're leaning into him being a mutant. So that was the news. I hope you enjoyed those topics. I did not expect, honestly, to be talking about them that long. I just wanted to not wait almost a week before talking about it again. So I hope you enjoyed covering the news. If there is a news topic moving forward you would like me to cover, make sure to tweet at me at Kyle_Naranja. That's NORONHA, or tweet at FilmRealist. Like I said earlier, don't forget Realist has 2 E's. Before the episode ends, I promised a mailbag. This week, I promised a mailbag, so we're going to do a mailbag. Let's get into the mailbag. All right, so I'm going to start off with the first question, which comes from Dan Vogel, which is, what do you think the new name of the LaRusso-Lawrence dojo is in Season 6? So mild spoilers ahead for Season 6 of Cobra Kai and 5. At the end of Season 5, the Eagle Fang and Miyagi-Do dojos unite to enter the Senkai Tenkai, which is the international karate tournament of the world, which is awesome. And if you want to hear how I feel about the season as a whole, like I said earlier, it's in another episode. I believe it's also in the Woman King episode, so check that episode out. It is... I don't know. I did see a theory online that I think is really cool and would be a great end cap to the show. So I've been having a really hard time. I know, Dan, you've had this question since the season the season premiered a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. Yeah, 3 weeks ago. We're almost at 3 weeks. And this is the best idea that I've seen, so I'm not going to credit it as my own idea, but I'm going to share it if you didn't hear it, which is that they are going to create a new dojo just called Karate, like the Karate Kid Dojo, because Daniel LaRusso is a Karate Kid, Joey Lawrence is a Karate Kid, and you can be the Karate Kid. I think that's really cool, and what would make it amazing is that would be the greatest way to wrap up the show. We don't actually get the title of the dojo, or the new name for the dojo, for all of Season 6, and then the show ends, and we have this almost original Cobra Kai and Miyagi-Do dojo fused together, and it's the Karate Kid Dojo written in the font of the film, with music but similar to the first Karate Kid, which would be amazing. I don't want more of this show. I don't want too much more of this show. I said that I went through that a lot in the episode. I think that would be a cool way. I have here that Dan's idea is Miyagi Fang. Yeah, it's totally true. The show, I didn't think we were ever going to be getting a third dojo to begin with Eagle Fang, which is as metal as the show possibly could be, given how on the nose a lot of it is. So I think that is a possibility, but I'm not necessarily sure that's what they're going to go with. Is it going to be as on the nose, or is it going to be some deep reference? We don't even know. We knew ahead of time. That's what one of my favorite parts about Cobra Kai is, that they are able to reference really minute details and make them matter significantly to the story as a whole. So that would be really, really cool. But thank you, Dan, for your question. If you would like to ask one, you can send it. You can put it in the chat when I am doing a mailbag on the stream live, or you can send it to my Twitter, or you can send it to the Film Realist Twitter as a whole. Okay, thank you, Dan, again for your question. Let's see. We've got 2 here from Jermaine. So, with the success of Top Gun, can you see Hollywood pushing action summer movies to which to replace superhero films, and he said he would like to see the day where it's huge action or sci-fi films and less superhero films. Now, that's a really interesting question. Now, Top Gun is a film that I don't think you can necessarily use as the perfect model for action films replacing superhero films. I think the industry has shown more often than not that recognizable IP is, if done well, is where the money is going to be. The best example that I could quantify something like Top Gun Maverick with is, while not necessarily the same amount of time, but it would be something like Force Awakens, which, well, yes, I guess you can throw into that sci-fi banner, but Star Wars as a brand, at one point, it's probably worth more now, was estimated to be worth, well, Lucasfilm as a whole, $5 billion. That was the purchase in 2012 of all of Lucasfilm to Disney. And when Force Awakens came back, that film grossed $2 billion because it was done well, and it was, for a lot of fans, a return to form with that franchise. And Top Gun follows a similar vein to that. While not obviously science fiction, it's a big action movie, but there are parts of Top Gun that are hard to recreate. You have very few franchises come back after 30 years. And typically when that does happen, they don't do overly well. Blade Runner 2049 did not have the success of Top Gun Maverick, and I think it's a better movie. It's niche because Blade Runner 2020, the original Blade Runner was niche, but it's something that is very hard to recreate, which is why Top Gun's success has been incredibly special, because it feels like an older style of movie, but done with all of the modern technology at its fingertips. The flight sequences are incredible. Obviously, I didn't do a review on it yet because the podcast wasn't running. But you also have one of Hollywood's last true leading actors. There are all kinds of leads, but you don't have icons like this leading films like this anymore. There used to be a day like that. The 80s, Hollywood was that for a long time, where names were more important than the movie itself. Tom Cruise is one of those people. He's built up his own franchises. You can clearly see his work with Christopher McQuarrie is leading films like the Mission Impossible franchise. We're getting 2 more of them, 1 each per summer. And that's, if you want to look at new trends, Paramount has postponed films so that way they didn't compete with their own film like Top Gun. I don't know if there's going to be like a day where sci-fi films and big action films are the highest grossing of the year. We are getting Avatar 2 at the end of this year, so that might be another $2 billion swing for Disney. Oh, poor them. But that's a returning intellectual property. It's not a new thing. Obviously, the original Avatar was a transcendent moment for the box office, given it is the highest grossing film of all time. It was re-released and made $30 million. That's a big deal. But studios are less and less inclined to make properties that are unknown or unrecognizable, and they're only really investing in stars, directors, or a recognizable intellectual property. Christopher Nolan, there are these auteurs who can go and make whatever they want, but ultimately there are few and far between films like Top Gun Maverick, where the Venn diagram of all of the things that work to make that a success don't happen very often. And unfortunately, I don't see that happening, especially with the boom of streaming services. With HBO Max, Paramount Plus, Amazon Prime, Netflix, a lot of those newer properties are going there. And a lot of those films, even with their massive budgets, wouldn't do well on the big screen. I liked The Gray Man, but I don't think it would have been a success in theaters, and Netflix probably knows that because they didn't give it a theatrical release. Something like Glass Onion might, because that was, while not a sci-fi or an action film, that it was a huge success, and then Netflix bought the whole idea and future of it for $400 million from Rian Johnson. I would love that to be the case. I like new things. If you want to see new movies and new ideas and make them successful, you got to go and see them. And if you have somebody you trust who's going to review them, who has similar taste to you, then you can see what they've liked, what they've reviewed, and then go see that movie for yourself, or sometimes go in blind. I have a couple close friends of mine who don't watch trailers. They hear what the whole idea of the movie is, and then they go and see it. And that works for some, but doesn't work for others. I like to see trailers to get some semblance of what I'm getting myself into. That doesn't always work. Green Lantern had an incredible trailer, and we know how that movie turned out. So variety in general is something that I've always really appreciated, and that's why I did reviews on a film like The Woman King, and I'm probably going to do some comedy reviews. I want to see other films that aren't just the Marvel movies or the DC movies, because after a while those things are going to get stale, and unless they do new things with them. So hopefully they do. I can't guarantee that, but there are reasons why things like the Marvel Cinematic Universe have been successful. Tron Legacy is another example of a film that was a returning sequel and done very, very well, and did not do well at all. So I'm not sure where there allegedly is a Tron 3, but I don't think it's going to be the Tron 3 anybody is interested in, which is unfortunate. But what are you going to do? So Jermaine asked 2 questions, so let's see what the other one is. It says Kevin Feige usually hits the mark with casting. I mean, he's got people working under him, but yeah, I see what you're saying. If I, Kyle, was to recast 2 of them, who would they be? He does not like Brie Larson and Mark Ruffalo. Well, I'm not going to bother to comment on who you dislike. I can understand not feeling that the character's portrayed in a way that you personally are connected to. Certainly that's been the case, particularly with Spider-Man. Everybody seems to have their favorite. Mine's Andrew Garfield. I can explain why, but that doesn't mean the other 2 are lesser to some degree. They're doing different things. It's partially why Batman's been such a success for the most part. I had a really hard time with this. I don't think I would recast any of the main Avengers. I mean, we don't really even know if we have an Avengers right now. So the first one that I came up with was Red Skull. And that's mostly because, while I think Hugo Weaving did a good job, I think if you had an actor wanting to return to that role, and he's been public about how he feels about the film and the role itself, it never happened again. And then we got Ross Marquand back doing voice work in Infinity War and Endgame. I don't know. I feel like if they had an actor who really wanted to play that character more, we would have had him maybe be a more integral part of the Infinity Saga, which would have been really, really cool, as he was somebody who was after one of the Infinity Stones without knowing about it, being the Tesseract, of course. Christoph Waltz, I think, would have been absolutely incredible. That may be pigeonholing him, as he's absolutely incredible in films like Inglourious Basterds. I liked his Blofeld in the James Bond films, so that was the first one that I came up with. I don't know if it's like controversial, but I love Christoph Waltz, and I like seeing him play bad guys. He's very good at it, and seeing more Red Skull interactions would have been really, really cool with Captain America. And specifically with Captain America, the current Captain America is Anthony Mackie, who was the Falcon. I'm not really a fan of what Anthony Mackie is doing with this character. It feels like a toned down version of Will Smith's character in Independence Day. So I don't know. I think there's more depth there to Falcon that we just haven't necessarily got from Anthony Mackie. I don't know if he is capable of performances like that. So I thought maybe somebody like Taye Diggs could have been more interesting in that character. I don't know. Obviously the rapport between Chris Evans and Anthony Mackie is the building blocks that built out that character, but I don't know. I feel like Chris Evans can have chemistry with anybody, really, and I think Taye Diggs could have done a really good job with that role. But again, these are all pie in the sky theories. So Anthony Mackie's going to keep playing that character. Obviously, we're getting Captain America: New World Order, so maybe I will be proven wrong. It's not that I dislike it. It's just I'm hoping for more from that character, and given we had a TV show with him in it, I think it was a lot of surface level stuff, and I'm hoping we get to dive deeper into that character, and I get to be proven wrong. Because as much as I like to hear the sound of my voice and say what I think, I like to hear what others like to think. and like to see myself get proven wrong, because then I'm in for a surprise, which is great. I love surprises, especially when there's something in a movie coming out that I don't know about. That's the best part about sitting in the theater and having that experience. I mean, sometimes it's nice to know, but besides the point. Some surprises are good, some are bad, I guess is where I'm going with that. But that will wrap up the mailbag. Thank you to Jermaine and Dan for your questions. I really do appreciate you sending them in, because it gives me an opportunity to talk directly to the listeners and the viewers and see what they want to hear my opinion about, or hear my opinion on certain subjects. So there will not be another episode this week. This was a special breaking news episode. I didn't want to wait, as I said at the very beginning of the episode, so I will be back next week, back to our regularly scheduled programming. I hope you have a great week, and just keep following the Twitter or the Instagram to see what I will be reviewing next week. That way you can keep up with it. Obviously, there will not be a mailbag next week, as I did it this week as a bonus episode. Have a great day. Have a great week. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next time.